In this video, I'm going to walk you through lesson 1 of B1, which is the unit from Open Syed on ecosystem interactions and dynamics. So it's all about the Serengeti as a case study, but we're also going to apply this to other conservation examples around the US and around the world. And so we're going to get into lesson 1 we're going to use the deep dive storyline, which I've provided a link to the slideshow below. Go ahead and open that, and then you can follow along as I go through some hyperlinks to key slides, maybe some documents or resources to help you get to know the lesson. But before we do that, I would like to jump into slide 2 and talk to you a little bit about the flow of this unit. So there are 3 lesson sets. Each one answers another broader question. Each lesson has even more narrow questions to develop the science ideas. And so the first lesson set is how do populations and ecosystems work? So we're looking at who's in the Serengeti and how do they, mostly the wildebeest, and how do they live and survive and migrate. Lesson set 2 is how do complex ecosystems work? So we're looking at the interactions between species. And then in lesson set 3, we're talking about how can we use what we've learned to protect not only the ecosystem in the Serengeti, but other places around the world. Now, when you create your driving question board in lesson 1, I like to provide some driving question board categories that will help you create your driving question board so that it relates to this storyline. Now, when I work with teachers, they're always nervous that the questions that students ask are not going to relate to the lessons in the unit. And I will tell you, when I first started doing this, I was very nervous about this as well. And after I had gone through this anchoring phenomenon routine with multiple units and multiple teachers, they always asked questions that applied to the unit every single time. So I lost my nervousness about this because it always worked. Now, sometimes there will be a few questions that don't relate. It's perfectly fine. You just create a category called other. And you may or may not get to that, probably not, which is fine. But you may also not get a category that you were kind of hoping for, and that's fine too. You can add a question or a category at any time in the unit. You can kind of listen for it, and when that question appears, you're like, that's interesting. Can you document that and add it to our driving question board? So you get it on there and it helps you navigate from, let's say, lesson set 2 to lesson set 3, which would be all about the protections. So here's the categories that I kind of tend to use in this unit. Humans and their role, animals, their interactions, could be about habitat, protections, and climate change seems to always come up. Although climate change is not really addressed in this unit, there tends to be a lot of questions about climate change, so document them. I will say that climate change can also be related to the ecosystem in how different components interact with each other. So it can be brought in just in a different lens. So I want to explain to you real quick how I do this. The driving question board can be pretty tricky when you're new to Open Syed or new to using driving question boards. There are many ways to do this. You need to figure out your own way. Some do it digitally, some do it on posters, but this is how I do it. I have, if I have everybody write a question or 3 questions, it's too many questions. So depending on the size of your class, I'll put students into groups, and then I'll have groups, they first write questions down in their notebook individually. Then they share their questions with their small group, and the group decides on their top 3 priority questions, and they put those on sticky notes. And then after that's done, I will say, okay, who wants to start us off? All right, thank you. Can you read your question? And then I say, okay, well, this is about, let's say the question is about how do we protect the environment? What can we do? How do we protect it? So I say, does anyone else have a question about how we can protect the ecosystem or the environment or what we can do? And then I have them read their questions while I walk around and I collect sticky notes all in my hand usually. And then I go up to the driving question board and I place them all on the driving question board and I label it protection. And I say, well, all of these questions kind of seem to be about the topic of protection. And so I label it with the category of protection. The categories really help with navigation. So you might not be able to see the little questions, but you can see we've got questions about this category, and that helps to point to for navigation. Now I'll say, does anyone else have a question about protection? If no one else does, okay, let's start a new category. Who has the next question? And then they ask their question, and it might be about humans and their role. So then I ask again, anybody have questions about this? I collect it and I place it on the driving question board. Now, you can have students place the questions on the driving question board themselves. You can have them facilitate this conversation, but I have found that students aren't great with this much chaos, especially at first. So it kind of controls the chaos when I'm the one walking around and I'm the one placing on the driving question board. Now, if you have a perfectly behaved classroom, more power to you. You can do this any way that you find works for you. Okay. You will also find that there's some summative assessments in this unit. Lesson 5, there is an exit ticket that could be considered summative. You might even be able to beef it up a little bit. Lesson 6, there's a mid-unit transfer task. So this means it's in a new context. The exit ticket is about what they've been learning about. The transfer task is what they've been learning about in a new context. Lesson 8 has another exit ticket, and then lesson 11 has a second transfer task, end of unit. So those are your big summative assessment opportunities in the unit. Okay, let's jump into lesson 1. Lesson 1 begins the question of how do populations and ecosystems work for lesson set 1. And here you can see that I have these hyperlinks to kind of help you get to know lesson 1. So let's walk through it. This usually takes about 4 days. I will say that this it could take you 5 if you're new to this. It might take a little longer, but spend the time in lesson 1 because this is where you anchor the whole unit and you really get students interested and curious and they're asking questions and related it to their own lives. Very important. Okay, so we start off by introducing this 30 by 30 initiative. And so the 30 by 30 initiative, which started in 2021, it was an executive order that said that we want to preserve 30% of lands and 30% of waters by the year 2030. And so many people signed up to do this, and even people around the world. And then you're going to watch a video with Secretary Holland. And she is actually, I don't think in this role anymore. She served until 2025. And she was the first Native American to ever serve as cabinet secretary. So very cool fun fact there. And this was a video made for the Endangered Species Day. And students are going to make observations and ask some questions. Here is the slide that will set it up. You'll have a link to your video and they will use a notice and wonder chart and write down what they notice and wonder as they watch the video. And so we then brainstorm some criteria for conservations. So we listen to what is happening with the video and then we figure out, well, what does that mean to us? Like, what do you think people use when they're deciding what to conserve for lands or water? So it might be, they want to help keep it pretty. They want to save the animals that are endangered. So we kind of brainstorm and we also uncover some, ideas that they bring to the table about conservation. And then we discuss and make a class list of the criteria. So this would be an initial ideas discussion. Whenever there's a discussion, it's important to look at these key idea callouts in the teacher guide. This is really kind of what we're looking for right here. I started to mention those. And then, here's a sample of what we brainstorm in a professional learning event. I didn't go very deep into it, but you can see what the teachers who were in student hat, acting like biology students, were saying. And so then we talked about related phenomenon. We talked about, there is also a resource to read about conservation. It's a home learning resource. You can do this in class. It doesn't have to be a home learning, but they do talk about with the community members what examples of places or land that they know of around their area that have been conserved. And so we make a list of some related phenomenon. Here is our prompting slide. And there's always somewhere around you that has, either a preservation or been conserved, or even national parks seem to come up. So then in small groups, we researched some case studies, and there is a slideshow that goes with this. And students are going to look at 4 different conservation profiles. And so you've got one up here in Washington State. It's the Hoh River. You've got one in, I think it's Arizona, the Seguro National Park. We've got the Lake Michigan conservation profile. I forget what animals in that one. And then we look at the conservation profile in the Everglades. You can imagine what is in that Everglades. So we're going to look at these conservation profiles, and then we write down some information from the slideshow. So we look at systems, components. So we're giving them a lens. This really helps with modeling. The systems, what components are there, and what interactions. This is a scaffold for modeling. So once we've done that, we then create initial models as groups. Students are in small groups, and they make some initial models to explain what was in their article or in their slideshow. And here's an example that comes from the teacher guide. You can do this digitally. I'm not sure what app was used for this, probably Google Draw or something like that. And then, or you can use a poster. So here's one from a PL event. They just kind of listed some components, interactions, and some systems here. So doesn't matter how you do it. I've seen some people do it by 11.5 paper as well. And then we ask students, we compare those, and then we ask students to develop a driving question board. With all this information, what questions do we have? Here is the slide that prompts that. You bring them into a scientist circle. Again, I said I probably wouldn't have every kid ask 3 questions. You'll figure out the best way to manage this in your class. Here's a sample driving question board from a friend of mine, Grace Schoen. And so here are the categories she used. And so again, this is definitely not one question per student. It's probably per a group, like a couple questions per group. That is it. The last thing we do to end the anchoring phenomenon routine is to ask for ideas for investigation. Like, what should we look at? Where can we get information? And maybe we should look at things, which will come up, other conservation plans that have worked. And that's where we're going to go to the Serengeti.